Hi, my name is Dr. Catherine Hughes from Crime Psych. In today's video I'm going to be doing a psychological analysis of Bruce McArthur. I have covered this case before, but sometimes with my earlier videos that I've done, I look back at them and I think, well, I could have included more information, or I could have said this, or I could have said that, so they're not as detailed as what they perhaps could have been. So I'm going to recover the case of Bruce McArthur. Bruce McArthur's full name is Thomas Donald Bruce McArthur, who was commonly known as Bruce McArthur. He was convicted of a number of murders in Canada in January 2019. McArthur killed 8 people. He's the most prolific known serial killer to have been active in Toronto and is the oldest known serial killer in Canada. McArthur and many of his victims were active on dating apps and websites for men who have sex with other men. MacArthur listed himself on those sites saying that he wanted to meet submissive men. Before I go on to talk about the murders and the psychology behind it is useful to tell you a little bit about his background. He was born in Ontario, Canada in 1951. He was born and raised in a rural area with his parents on a farm. He had one sister, however his parents fostered troubled children from Toronto and often had up to 10 children in their care at any given time. They had a really good reputation in the area. He attended a very small school and his classmates have said that they thought he was trying to be the teacher's pet sometimes. He'd often tell the teacher about the mischief that some of the boys were getting up to and that he never got along with them. He'd won a few singing competitions at school as well. His mother was an Irish Catholic and his father was a Scottish Presbyterian, and both of them were devout in their religion. That did cause some arguments within the home, and MacArthur would always side with his mother. His father was said to be very strict. Much of Bruce McArthur's early life has been previously reported, including the fact that he lost both of his parents when he was in his 20s. His father was sent to a nursing home and he was diagnosed with a brain tumour at the age of 49. MacArthur was said to be hurt when his mother became interested in a new man. He became much closer to his father in the later years of his life. His father finally opened up to him and expressed his love towards him. So far, there's nothing really unusual about his background or his upbringing that would suggest that he would go on to commit a number of murders. MacArthur knew that he was homosexual. However, he'd met and married Janice and they had a son and a daughter together. He was a very active member of his church. All of that is most likely because he'd been brought up in a rural area with religious parents, and being gay wouldn't have been very widely accepted. Therefore, he lived a lie covering up his feelings. And this is where you can see that problems might have started to build up within him. Can you imagine actually hating who you are and how you feel? Dealing with that inner turmoil every single day. Again though, that's not unusual. Many people have found themselves in situations similar to that and haven't gone on to kill people. He worked as a travelling salesman and he was able to begin and engage with sexual behaviour with other men. He eventually came out as being gay to his wife and they stayed together for a while but eventually did get divorced. After the couple had split up, MacArthur regularly went to gay bars and villages and he had a 4-year relationship with a man. He did see a psychiatrist after that relationship ended and his divorce was final and he was diagnosed as depressed and was given Prozac. And that's when he began working as a landscaper. In 2001, MacArthur met a man on his chat line and they later met and they had sex. A few weeks after MacArthur's 50th birthday, the man invited MacArthur into his apartment. MacArthur struck him over the back of the head with an iron pole that he often carried. He was knocked unconscious and when he woke up he phoned an ambulance. He'd suffered injuries to his head and his body and he needed several stitches on the back of his head and his fingers, as well as 6 weeks of physiotherapy following that. This seems really odd for a man who'd not been violent before. And why was he carrying an iron pipe with him anyway? He had no criminal record before that attack and he was a trusted member of the community. MacArthur turned himself in after that attack, but he says that he has no recollection of the incident. He pleaded guilty, but he wasn't sent to prison. Instead, he served part of the 2-year conditional sentence under house arrest. A psychiatric assessment was carried out and suggested that Macarthur was at a very low risk to reoffend. The report paints a picture of a man who tried to be well liked and obey others, but might possess underlying resentments, it said. He was passive, indecisive, he tended to procrastinate, and he could be easily upset by changes to his daily routine, and he lacked insight into himself, that report went on. The report went on to say that Mr. Macarthur's overt cooperativeness might hide strong rebellious feelings that might break through to the surface. Fear of exposing these socially unacceptable feelings and a desire to maintain his surface control led him to an overly organised life and was very self-rigid. At the time, there were also concerns that Macarthur's unexplained behaviour might have been due to the combination of anti-seizure medication that he was on with amyl nitrate, and that's a muscle relaxant which is sometimes taken recreationally before sex. Their son, Todd, had been making obscene phone calls to women that he didn't know. If Bruce himself had struggled with dealing with the fact that he was gay, it's unsurprising that other family members would have also found it difficult to accept. In 2014, Todd was sentenced to 14 months in jail for making multiple obscene phone calls. He was released on bail and he was ordered to stay at his father's apartment and assist him in his landscaping business. A former friend of Todd's is reported to have said that the bathroom wall was covered in pictures of naked men with erections. He said that most of the men appeared to be East Indian, and he also said that Todd had told him that these were men that his father knew. Macarthur never hid that fact. In fact, he laughed about it over breakfast. And I would imagine being a young teenage boy who's struggling to accept his father as being gay and living in these conditions would be incredibly difficult. I would be asking myself why any parent would have pictures of naked people on the walls with their children around, regardless of their sexual orientation. To me, it seems as though Macarthur is acting out. After so many years of hiding being gay, he was now overly open about it. So this just gives you a bit of background and an idea of who he is. Macarthur was arrested in January 2018 after police connected him with 2 missing people. He was known in the gay village and on several gay dating websites. He was also known for having violent outbursts as well. And that indicates to me that there is some suppressed anger and rage leaking out. By acting out in such violent ways to other homosexuals, he's subconsciously attacking himself and his own sexuality. In 2011, he told a friend about an incident in which he'd been asked to leave a coffee house, which caused Macarthur to knock all of the glasses off the counter in a rage. This friend decided to keep away from Macarthur because he'd heard disturbing things about him. At the age of 66, he was connected to a number of disappearances in the gay community, which led the police to set up surveillance on him. Macarthur was subsequently arrested in January 2018 and he pleaded guilty to 8 counts of murder. During the investigation, police found dismembered body parts from several of his victims buried in planters. He and all of his victims had met on a gay dating website. Macarthur had stated that he wanted to meet submissive men when he entered his details on that. And that's a fairly chilling detail because he obviously knew what he was going to do to these men. He knew he was going to kill them. And so by asking for submissive men, he knew that he was going to be able to tie them up or handcuff them easily. Macarthur had targeted vulnerable men who didn't have a fixed address or hadn't told their families that they were gay. Again, this indicates that he's attacking his own sexuality. He had a resentment about being gay. However, once he came out, he was very sexually active. This doesn't mean that he was completely comfortable, though, with who he was. When you consider his very strict religious upbringing and his parents' views on homosexuality, it's very unsurprising. Macarthur had 3 interactions with the police during his killing spree. However, he was released each time. And that is always likely to give the offender a sense of confidence that he was able to get away with these murders. He'd known some of his victims for years before killing them. A friend of one of his victims said that he was angry with himself for not seeing Macarthur for what he was. This suggests that he hid behind a mask of normality. He was able to interact in a normal way and fit in with society. He was even Santa at the local mall one year. He had the ability to fit in and suppress the rage and anger that he was experiencing and outwardly present himself in a good way, and that's a fairly manipulative trait. There are a couple of victims who escaped from Macarthur before he was able to kill them. One victim was invited into the back of his van, presumably for casual sex. Macarthur had told him to get in the back of the van on top of a fur coat. The victim noticed that the back of the van was covered in plastic, and so he made his escape. Another victim that escaped was at his apartment when the police entered to arrest Macarthur. This last victim's family didn't know that he was gay, and texts between him and Macarthur indicated that they intended to keep their interaction a secret. After handcuffing his victim, Macarthur had placed a plastic bag over his head and he'd taped his mouth. If the police hadn't have turned up and arrested him, that would have been another murder victim. Macarthur also shaved the hair and beards of several of his victims, and he kept the hair in a plastic bag at his workplace. These kind of actions and behaviours are fairly common with serial killers. They're likely to take some kind of a memento so that they can use that to relive the event. The photographs of the bodies are also likely to have been used in the same way. By posing his victims in the various ways that he did, Macarthur is showing that he has control over his victims. And that could be an unconscious psychological mechanism of not being able to control his own sexual tendencies and compensating for this by controlling his victims. Macarthur showed considerable control of himself most of the time. He comes across as, to most people, as being kind, helpful, loving, placid, a lovely man. However, whenever there's some sort of significant trigger, he unleashes that anger and frustration that he's been holding back. It's akin to shaking a bottle of fizzy cola and then taking the lid off. All of his victims were bound and either stabbed or strangled. One victim was stabbed over 100 times. This is a very hands-on way of killing that takes the killer to get very close to the victim. Stabbing a person that many times suggests that it was a rage attack and overkill. Body parts were dismembered and hidden in various planters. Now, he worked as a landscaper and he hid these various body parts under soil in the customers' planters. So even after death, he was posing the bodies for photographs. He continued to interact with and control his victims. These were all of his victims were linked to Macarthur's landscaping business. The majority of crime that any offender commits is likely to be in between normal everyday activities. Routine activity theory suggests that crime doesn't become a separate facet to a person's life. However, it's integrated within their normal non-criminal daily activities. And that is shown in this case in the way that their bodies were disposed of. Macarthur used his landscaping activities to assist him in disposing of the victims' bodies. He shows a large degree of power and control over these men. I think that the most likely explanation for this is his frustration at not being able to control his own sexual desires towards men. He's using these men as a surrogate for hurting himself. He can't control his sexual orientation, even though he tried so hard for so many years. Therefore, this desire to control was then directed towards his victims. To put it fairly simply, he doesn't want to be who he is, and that makes him have fits of rage and anger. Because he buries these feelings deep down within himself, they stay there until he can no longer control it. Macarthur is suspected of a number of killings in the 1970s, and that is highly likely because most serial killers begin to kill much earlier in their life than Macarthur did. In conclusion, what seemed to be a well-respected member of the community turned into a violent serial killer. He had a very strict upbringing and probably struggled to accept the fact that he was gay initially. He came across as being so nice to so many people, and that therefore it was a shock when he was convicted of these crimes. I do hope that you found this video interesting and insightful. Take care of each other, and always inform another person if you're going to meet somebody who you don't know, meet them in a public place. Just because somebody seems to be nice doesn't mean that they actually are. Take care of each other. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.